Year 11 and welcome to the History Around Us content videos. So this video is for Dudley Castle, and the time period that this information will be about is the Stuart period, which is the 1600s or the 17th century. Our timeline of Dudley Castle. So we have the medieval period first of all, 1066 to 1500, where the themes are creation and battles. We have the 1500s with the Tudor period, where the themes are leisure and luxury. We have the 1600s with the Stuarts, where we have war as the main theme with the English Civil War. We have 1700 to 1900, which is the industrial period, where the castle is in ruins following the fire of 1750. And finally, we have Dudley Castle's transformation into a zoo, which happens in the modern period, 1900 to present day. This video, though, is going to focus on the 1600s and Dudley Castle during the Stuart period. Features. It's worth here speaking about what was the English Civil War. So just as a quick recap. So first of all, the English Civil War is between Charles I and Parliament. So Charles I, who was a Stuart, became King of England in 1625. And there was a dispute between the King and Parliament, which developed into a civil war in 1642. So a civil war, again, just a reminder that this is a war within a country. There were two sides in the English Civil War. They were the Parliamentarians, who are known as the Roundheads, and the Royalists, who are known as the Cavaliers. And Dudley Castle was a royalist castle throughout the war. So the first siege or battle that Dudley Castle was involved in was in 1644, and this is when the royalists attempt to protect the castle from the Parliamentarians, which resulted in fighting in Tipton Green, which is very near to the present-day Black Country Living Museum, which is next to the castle and zoo. I'm sure lots of you have been at some point. The leader of the Parliamentarians, Lord Denbigh, and his soldiers attacked the castle, so the king sent soldiers to help from his base in Worcester. Although both sides claimed victory, it was technically a royalist victory, so this means Dudley Castle remains unharmed, as the royalists in Dudley Castle had succeeded in fighting off the Parliamentarians and holding the castle for the next 2 years. So Parliamentarian General Sir William Brayton advanced towards Dudley for the second battle, which was in 1645. The attack saw more fighting, including one that was at the Priory, but the Royalists had to face the fact that they were fighting a losing battle. So Colonel Leveson, commander of the Royalist troops, surrendered the castle on the 13th of May 1646. He rides out of the castle accompanied by 340 men at 1 o'clock, and for Dudley the civil war was over. What this means, though, is that the Parliamentarians took over Dudley Castle, and this leads to huge changes in the physical remains at the site. So you do not need to know every detail that I have just been through in terms of the battle, but what you do need to know is that it was held as a royalist site, so it supported King Charles I, and as a result of Parliamentarian victory during the English Civil War, this is why we see the castle slighted, which we'll speak about in just a moment. So at the end of the English Civil War, Charles I was defeated. As we said, the Parliamentarians were victorious, and he is put on trial for treason in 1649 and executed. And after further conflict, the Civil War finally came to an end in 1651. So what the purpose of Dudley Castle during Stuart England actually was. It changes back to one of defence during the English Civil War from 1642. So in the Stuart period, we know that the purpose of the castle is now back similar to what it was in medieval England. It is now not a luxurious Renaissance palace as it was during the Tudor period. As a result of the castle supporting Charles I during the English Civil War, the Parliamentarians slight the castle, so they damage the keep, the gatehouse and the defensive walls, all in purple, remember, because they are physical features that could be used in the exam. And this slighting ends Dudley's role as a military castle forever. It is worth noting that the domestic buildings of the castle were allowed to remain intact, and they were used occasionally for the next 100 years or so by the Earls of Dudley or the Ward family, who now own the castle after the Suttons. So the castle is only damaged in terms of its military features, not its domestic buildings. But the slighting left the castle remains as a ruin, and this is not greatly different from the one that we see today. A law was written that any structure that had been slighted or defortified during the English Civil War would be banned from refortifying again, and therefore the English Civil War sees an end to Dudley Castle's role as a place of battle or defence. In terms of the turning points during this time period, we have discussed these on previous slides, but if you've got a question relating to turning points, you could speak about these events. So firstly, as we've discussed the English Civil War, Dudley played a part in 2 battles defending the Royalist castle from the Parliamentarian forces. However, Colonel Leveson, commander of the Royalist troops, surrenders Dudley to the Parliamentarians on the 13th of May 1646. And this leads to the turning point of the castle, which is that it is slighted, so defortified. So the keep, the gatehouse and the defensive walls are the physical features that you would need to refer to in the exam if you were speaking about this time period. And remember that they are slighted as a result of parliamentarian victory during the English Civil War. So in terms of the physical features that still remain that you would reference if you were talking about the Stuart era, we simply have the keep, the gatehouse and the defensive walls. All of these were slighted, so we can see evidence of the castle's use during the English Civil War, but all still remain today. In terms of who was there and what attitudes and values were shown during the Stuart era, we have different types of people who would have been at the site, including members of the gentry who became army generals supporting King Charles I when Dudley was a royalist stronghold, soldiers who were needed to protect the castle from the parliamentarians, and the Ward family, remember, who occasionally, following Dudley's slighting at the end of the English Civil War, came to stay in the domestic quarter. In terms of attitudes and values, we have war, battles and defence during this time period. That is what you would be discussing if you were speaking about Dudley Castle during the Stuart period. So in terms of how typical Dudley Castle is, remember we are comparing Dudley to Shrewsbury and to Kenilworth Castle. So overall, Dudley during the Stuart period was typical. Royalist castles throughout England during the Civil War were attacked and then they were slighted as punishment by the parliamentarians. So Shrewsbury Castle was also held by the Royalists. It was refortified in preparation for the battle. So prior to the English Civil War, it gets strengthened in the hope that the Royalists will be able to defend it. So a tower was added plus a 2-storey gate, and the curtain wall was developed to make it more suitable for firearms. However, parliamentarians attacked the castle and quickly overran the city of Shrewsbury, and the castle was slighted. So its gatehouse and some of its walls were destroyed. So again, the slighting that has happened on these physical features is in purple for you on the screen. They are examples that you could speak about. Kenilworth was also slighted in 1649. So Oliver Cromwell, the leader of the parliamentarians, ordered that the moat should be drained and parts of the walls destroyed, again in purple as they are physical features that could be discussed. And this is so that Kenilworth could no longer be used as a military castle. So Kenilworth and Shrewsbury suffering very similar fates to Dudley. In terms of local and national significance during the Stuart period, from a national perspective, the castle has a significance because of the local battles which took place in Dudley, and this was in the context of the English Civil War, which was between Parliament and the King, making the castle significant on a national level. In terms of local significance, again, we've spoken about the fact that 2 battles took place there, and the Royalists successfully defended Dudley Castle at Tipton Green before being defeated in the second battle, which is near the Priory and leads to the slighting of Dudley Castle. So that concludes the content for the Stuart period, and the next video on Dudley Castle will be in relation to the fire that happens in 1750 and Dudley's past during the industrial period.